Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the September meeting of Leeds Council Executive Board. I'm going to ask everybody here to remember that this meeting is webcast live, and welcome anybody watching online. And I'm going to turn now just to the formal start of the meeting. So item 1, please. Are there any appeals against refusal of inspection of documents?
Thanks, Chair. To confirm, there have been no appeals received for today's meeting, no.
Thank you. Is there any exempt information for exclusion of the press and public?
Yes, Chair. Should the board be agreeable, then appendices 1 to 3 of agenda item 15, which is the provision of a loan for Leeds Culture Trust to cover culture sector tax relief claims, designated as being exempt from publication under Access to Information Procedure Rule 10.43, would be considered in private at the conclusion of the public part of the meeting.
Thank you. Item 3, are there any late items, please?
To confirm, Chair, there are no formal late items of business. However, with your agreement, supplementary information has been circulated to board members and published in the form of Appendix 2 to item 13, which is the Leeds Inclusive Growth Strategy 2023-2030 for members' consideration under that item.
That's great, thank you. Item 4, I'm going to turn to the board and see if there's any declarations of interest. Councillor Pryor, please.
It's not a pecuniary interest, but just with relation to item 15, I am a trustee of the Leeds Culture Trust, and this is a role I was appointed to by the council. So I'm not required to declare an interest under the council's code of conduct. I just want to make it clear to the board that in my exec board role, I'll of course make a decision on what is in the best interest of the council, not withstanding my position as a Leeds Culture Trust trustee.
Thank you. Are there any more declarations of interest, please? No, so I'm going to turn to item 5, which is a minutes of the July meeting. Just before we get to that, one of the items in the July meeting minutes was we agreed to agree the June meeting minutes subject to a matter of accuracy raised by Councillor Lamb being looked into. We've had a look at that. I've considered it, and as chair, I'm satisfied that the minutes of the June meeting were a correct record as agreed by the board in July. So I'm going to move on to the minutes of the July meeting and check everybody's happy they are an accurate record. Take it everybody is. It's great, thank you. And we'll move on then to the first paper on today's exec board, which is item 6, please, Councillor Hayden.
Thank you, Chair. This is the Leeds Rail Infrastructure Integrated Rail Plan for the North and Midlands. So this report provides an update on the government's delivery of the Integrated Rail Plan and seeks endorsement of the SLC Rail recommendation for a phased approach towards the delivery of rail capacity, frequency and connectivity for the eastern regions, and in particular the initial delivery of a T-shaped station in Leeds and a line to connect into the upgraded and electrified route from Sheffield to Moorthorpe. It's quite a technical report, and I present it to Exec Board for consideration of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Are there any comments on the report, please? Councillor Lamb, please.
It's a question and then a comment. So just wonder if you could talk us through any potential impacts on allocated sites in the city centre and around from the proposal.
Martin, would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I suppose there's multiple aspects to that question in terms of the SLC rail proposal that aligns to the safeguarded land that the Secretary of State safeguarded in 2017 as part of the Eastern Leg HS2 proposal. So in that sense, it doesn't really impact on our site allocations, other than the legacy of the Junction 45 land that we allocated in the enterprise zone for employment purposes, which is the subject of the depot proposal, which still sits there. I think looking outside of the SLC rail report, it then comes into, are there any potential implications for allocated sites for the government's proposals in its terms of reference and the 5 options that sit there? And whilst they're not been progressed in detail yet, given the constraints around the existing station and the east-west alignment. The potential exists for some clash with existing site allocations, subject to the detail of that work. That is a risk, but it's not known yet in terms of definitively until that work and those proposals come forward for how HS2 trains would come to Leeds.
Thank you, Martin. Tom, would you like to come in, please?
General comment.
Please, Tom.
Sorry, I was just going to make a comment about the depth of and breadth of partnership activity around this piece of work, which is the fact that we can get all the authorities on the eastern side of the country to agree to this piece of work and to put it forward into the process is very much testament to a lot of work that's gone on. So although the terms of reference was delayed for 2 years or so, 18 months or so, we haven't sort of stopped in the meantime. And also in terms of partnership, working with the key agencies and with DFT, there's good steps forward here in terms of commitments to work together, working groups. We have the station group already with Network Rail particularly and DFT, and there's an official level group at a very senior level in DFT that myself and the Chief Executive Bradford are involved in, and we're making sure that there'll be periodic ministerial and political meetings as part of that as well, with the leader and the mayor particularly. So yeah, we're trying to move forward in the context that is clear in the paper.
Thank you, Tom. And Councillor Lamb, you wanted to make a comment, please.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful and reassuring. The wider point for me is, I think, given where we are, this is a sensible approach. I think the bit that we still need to really grapple with, and perhaps something can be brought forward to Executive Board in future, is a more strategic plan to whether one station is sufficient for the city centre, and how we properly integrate the train capacity with bus capacity and a potential future mass transit system, because it still seems bonkers to me that there's such a great distance between the bus station, the train station, and I think we need to have a strategic think about how that is delivered and looked at going forward. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Tom, please.
Yeah, just to make the point that effectively this is a new station that we're proposing. It's next to the existing station in terms of rail, and so there is a big argument for us in terms of the resilience of the network and the reliability of the network. That's the way that we've tried to integrate it together. The point about buses is another one that we can come back to in the future. But on rail, that's the solution that that's one of the reasons why we think we need to stick with this alongside the existing station, because as you say, we're quite almost unique in having such a big city with only one major station in the city centre.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 24, and I'll take it that the board is happy with that. That's great, thanks. I'm going to move on to Councillor Venner's papers, please, and item 7.
Thank you, Chair. I just have this one paper, which is a proposal to change the age range of Rothwell Primary School from 3 to 11 to 4 to 11, following the permanent closure of the nursery. The paper is recommending a move to publish a statutory notice to permanently close the nursery. It's been temporarily closed since September of last year, and it wasn't really viable because of the amount of other provision in the area. There's a lot of private provision in particular in the area. And most of the people who responded to the consultation about this have been in favour, because it's meant there's more physical space in the primary school because they're not running the nursery. Where people did raise concerns, they were about choice largely, but there are a lot of other providers in that area. Ward members haven't expressed any concern about it, so this this is fairly straightforward, really. It's just a recommendation to publish the statutory notice to permanently close the nursery. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Are there any comments on this paper, please? There are not, so I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 84, and I take it the board are happy with those. So we're going to move on to my papers under my portfolio, and the first one is a short but useful report, just bringing to exec board the recommendation that we start the work on updating the best city ambition. This will come back to November exec board with consultation between now and then. So it is asking exec board to agree that we start work on that. So if there's any comments on that, please. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The positive first, because I mean, it's been coming forward for some time, and I'm pleased that the comments that have been made in previous consultation have been taken on board about measuring, and there's an awful lot of indicators and things to measure here. The bit that I'd ask for, and I think it's important, it's in at this stage for people to consult on, is what's not clear with all the measuring is what will define success or not of this plan. That was the challenge of the previous 10-year iteration. That was difficult at the end of it to say that was a success or not. So I think it just needs something in there to clearly define what would success look like from this this strategy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Lamb. I mean, we've got a whole range of things, as you say, and we do want to sharpen that in this iteration. But equally, we do need to just realise that the world is changing so much that, you know, it's hard to be absolute and categoric about what will be delivered given some of those changes. I mean, we particularly want to look to the social progress index that's been developed, you know, through the inclusive growth strategy, has been a real kind of acid test of is it making a difference on the ground to people, and particularly in those communities that need things the most. And then we'll try and make sure that we've got a good basket across, in particular, the 3 pillars in the iteration that comes forward later on this year.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but didn't quite answer the question. And it might be more a political answer rather than an officer answer. But what is the ambition? If I asked Tom what his ambition was for Middlesbrough, he'd be able to say it's to be in the Premier League, stay in the Championship, be in the Premier League. It's clearly definable whether that was success or failure. For you, it would be Leeds United back in the Premier League, back in the Champions League. That's clearly defined. There are lots of other things you would measure along the way. We seem to have the lots of things you'd measure along the way, but I'm not clear what, other being the best city, is the ambition. What does that actually look like?
Well, I'll pick up where you finish, because again, we are quite clear about our ambition is to be the best city in all areas that we work. I do think it's a useful challenge. I'll take it as our very first consultation response and look at as we take this work forward to bring that back as we move forward. But as I said, we'll bring this work back to a future executive board, and again, be very clear around the point you've made, Councillor Lamb, about how we use that. As Tom touched on, we talk about again in the inclusive growth update later on in the meeting around where our success lies. I do think that is a useful challenge, and we'll bring that back when we bring the refreshed best city ambition back later in the year. Are there any more comments on this report, please? I don't see any, so I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 99, noting comments made, and we will I see that the board is happy with those, so we'll move on to the next item, which is the annual corporate risk and resilience report, which is I think it's really important in our governance as an organisation that we receive this report at executive board every year. So as key decision makers, we are fully aware of the risks that are within the activity of the council and the work that is done to mitigate those risks moving forward. It's a really thorough piece of work that the team put together on that, and the work across the council to try and make our if not make our lives easier, make them slightly quieter at times about the risk. But clearly, we recognise in many activities of the that the council undertakes, and particularly in the budget pressures at the moment, there are a lot of risks that we need to continue to continually manage. With that introduction, I'll leave it there and see if there are any comments on the paper, please. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously the big red light is around finances, but I think we're going to cover that in other papers, so I won't bring that up here. Where I would appreciate a bit more detail is around the increasing risk identified to safeguarding children, and what that risk is and what the plan is for it.
Julie, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Lamb. I think we've talked previously in Executive Board just about the challenges that Leeds face in conjunction with the local authorities right across the country. Some of the national challenges that we have, which have been set out and articulated in the Josh McAllister review. So if we think about post-pandemic, if we think about the impact of poverty, if we think about mental health, in particular post-pandemic, on children and families. Also, you know, the national crisis that we've got around placements, around cost of placements. But what I would say is we have a very clear, successful strategy around that. We have our Children and Young People's Plan. We've had the refresh of that plan. We have our obsessions, our outcomes, our priorities. We've had the ILAC last year, which again highlighted the strength of the partnership, the strength of the LSCP, the three key statutory partners, and the wider Children and Young People's Partnership that sits underneath that. So there's an awful lot of work going on, as you would expect, within the Directorate, both in terms of our ongoing performance management, our quality assurance, our workforce development, I suppose that scrutiny and grip on the quality of our practice, which essentially is what will keep children safe. And that is not just our practice within the Directorate, but as I've referenced, our practice as a partnership across the city. So our focus on that is relentless, both within the Directorate, both corporately, but both at a strategic level across the partnership.
Thank you, Julie. Are there any more comments on this report, please?
So can I just...
Yes, please, Tom.
Just on the same thing, I just add that there is a lot of national work going on about the risk in the sector more generally, and a dialogue with senior civil servants and ministers about the challenge, in-year challenge and the future challenge, in terms of particularly the impact of external placements. And we've submitted some material on that that's been helpful to them. And there's an NSPCC report out this week, I think, or last week, that really sort of graphically illustrated just how big the challenge is. And that puts additional pressure on the rest of the councillors we'll hear later, and it puts additional pressure on the service who are trying to manage the extra risk in the system coming out of the pandemic and cost of living crisis, etc., etc. So yeah, it's a really important issue that we have on our radar within the council, and I think it is important to say that it's also on the radar of nationally and of virtually every council with this responsibility as well.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Venner, please.
Yeah, if I could just add to that. I was at the Local Government Association a couple of weeks ago, because of being on the Children and People's Board, but all the people from all the boards were there. And the LGA officers were identifying it as what they see as their most significant lobbying issue in terms of their work with national government, and the biggest risk currently facing councils around the overspends on children's services and what that means in human terms, in terms of more children coming into care, but also it is identified as the biggest financial risk facing councils. And that's the LGA, as you know, is cross-party. That view is reflected, I'd say, cross-party nationally through the councils that are involved with the LGA. So they've identified it as the biggest risk as well, the most important issue they need to lobby government on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 105, and I see the board are happy with those recommendations. So we move on to Councillor Cooper's items, please, and paper number 10.
Thank you, Leader. The first of my reports today is the annual corporate performance report, which comes to Executive Board on a regular basis annually. It covers all the work through all the directorates in the council, and it highlights performance against the key performance indicators that are in the report. The Executive Board's not the only board that we report performance to. We also do so through scrutiny, where performance goes on a regular basis to the relevant scrutiny boards. Also, performance goes through to community committee areas and to other boards such as Health and Wellbeing Board, to mention just one. I think it provides some important information as well in terms of our citizenship, and some there's a good infographic that shows some good statistics around the people who we have as living in the city. The report also mentions the new off-log requirements and the metrics that we're going to need to incorporate into our regular performance reports, and we'll bring further information back to Executive Board on how we intend to do that, and also through the relevant scrutiny boards too. The report also mentions the peer review team that visited, and the report mentions them revisiting. Well, we've already had the revisit that took place last week, and we await the report from that revisit. But just for information for Executive Board, the feedback was really positive from that revisit. But we await the detail, as I say, in the report. I'll leave it there, Chair, for any other comments or questions.
Thank you. Are there any comments on this report? Councillor Lamb, please.
Thank you. There's a huge amount of detail in here, so but I'm conscious this will go to scrutiny boards, etc. So there's just two areas I'd like to ask for a little more detail about. First one is around sickness rates, which stubbornly 12.84 days, and the target's 8.5. So I wonder if someone could talk about what the impact of that is on the budget, what's behind that, and what the action plan is to try and address it.
Mariana, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Lamb. I probably have to get back to you on the precise figure in terms of what that difference means. I mean, Scrutiny Board have explored sickness a lot in terms of helping us, and it's been a big priority for us. And, you know, we've had a really extensive programme in the last 12 months or so, where we've really focused on those 13 areas where the sickness is the highest. And seen some quite dramatic improvements, but still, you know, further to go. And I know all directors, it's certainly, you know, top of our list in terms of making sure that we do get people, you know, people are well in work, fit to be in work, and being as productive as possible. And we'll keep going until we can hit the target, and ideally below it if we can, partly because of the impact on colleagues, and partly because of the impact on the financial position, particularly in those areas where, you know, we need to get agency staff to cover services.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb?
Yeah, thank you. I think it would be useful to get some more information, perhaps a separate briefing about, my rough estimate is that's about 60,000 working days lost over the target, which is obviously, when we're talking about budgets and things and impact on other staff and services, as you said, is significant. So I think it's right to be a priority. The second area I wonder if someone could talk to is around the increase in road traffic incidents, which has gone up 34% year on year, which, given it is an area where we have had a significant amount of spend in highways improvements with the NGT money and so on over years, and it really sticks out like a sore thumb that we've invested a lot and the numbers have gone the other way So I wonder if anyone can help us with why that is.
Martin, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the trajectory of those numbers, they declined over a number of years and then they've hollowed out and started to increase. We then had the pandemic where they fell significantly, clearly as a consequence of much lower volumes of traffic. Post-pandemic, they have gone up and they've gone up above to where they were pre-pandemic in terms of those numbers. And so that is a concern. And that's one of the principal reasons why Leeds, as part of a wider West Yorkshire initiative, are working on the Vision Zero to take a zero tolerance approach where it's everybody's responsibility to get those numbers down. And that's where we're working very closely with transport providers, the police, West Yorkshire Combined Authority, to have an action plan, and we go to scrutiny regularly to focus on bringing those numbers down because it is a concern, part of a national trend.
Thank you. Councillor Hayden, please.
Thank you. Just to add to Martin's points there, Vision Zero, that there is nobody killed or injured on Leeds roads by 2040 is really important to us. But as Martin mentioned, it's a whole system approach. There's only so much engineering you can do to stop accidents. It's about behaviour change. It's about drivers taking responsibility, realising that it's not necessarily an accident. The car doesn't perform on its own. It's all of our responsibility when we're driving, when we're using the roads, to keep everybody safe and to drive properly. There's so much engineering out and money you can spend on roads to make sure if behaviour doesn't change, then the accidents won't, the collisions won't reduce. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more comments on this paper, please? I don't see anybody, so I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 141 to see that the board are happy with those recommendations. So could we go on to item 11, please, Councillor Cooper?
Thank you, Leader. Item 11 is the medium-term financial strategy. This again is a regular update that we bring to Executive Board on the longer-term view of the financial situation of the council. And this report brings information to Executive Board around the money that's coming into the council and the money that is due to be paid out from the council as well. In terms of the general fund, the medium-term financial strategy identifies an estimated budget gap of £251 million over the 5-year period. The other element to this is the capital programme, and it updates Executive Board on the 10-year capital programme that we have also laid out for you. It goes into other detail also about ring-fenced accounts, the HRA, and which is the housing revenue account, and the dedicated schools grant. I'll leave it there for now, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this paper, please? Councillor Lamb, please.
Thank you, Chair. And obviously we're going to come to the current year in a minute. So I think what this tells us, we have to think differently. The chief exec joked about a potential snap election announcement today, which some may hope there is, some may think less so. But what's crystal clear is whatever the outcome of an election when it comes, there isn't suddenly going to be a whole load more money flowing anywhere. I think that's been made pretty obvious by all parties. So what this paper demonstrates is a requirement to think differently. And I suppose my challenge would be, and there is an element of this within the papers, is we have to look more to partners who perhaps haven't had to face the same financial challenges to date as local government has. I'm thinking of the devolved authorities where The last time we met, the next day was a meeting of WICA, and I came away from here thinking, well, we're doing all we can to scrape around and find the money to do the things we're required to do. And then I went to WICA the next day and felt the exact opposite, that it felt like an organisation scrabbling around trying to find things to spend all its money on. And I think there's some conversations to be had about how we look at the responsibilities each organisation has, and how there's a more joined up strategic approach, and how we make devolution really work. And also there's an element in the health service where I fully accept there are a lot of pressures there, but the challenge they face with ring fence protected budgets for the last decade or so is very different. And there are a lot of shared outcomes where I think that's really the challenge. It's to think differently about how we deliver services and how we look at working in partners who perhaps are in a better financial position than we are. So I just wonder what the thinking is around those kind of things.
Councillor Cooper, please.
Yes, well, if I can start, and if there's any further detail needed, I'm sure that Victoria and Mariana may want to come in. But as you would expect, Councillor Lamb, all of that work is being undertaken given how our really challenging financial situation that we are in as a council. So the work with our partners around, what we might be able to do differently in terms of the partnership work with them, what we fund, what they fund, and how we may look at it, do things differently is already happening, as is lots of conversations within our organisation, within the council, as to what we can look at in terms of saving money. And more of those proposals will be brought to Executive Board in October around the current year pressures, and also about next year's pressures. But we are facing significant pressures in this organisation, and there is no doubt that we are going to have to take some difficult decisions in the few months ahead of us.
Would anybody else like to come on this report, please? I think it's worth just on the WICA comment, because I was at the same meeting as well. I mean, clearly the current government has chosen to funnel funding through WICA for a number of areas. I don't feel any of the transport investment or money to regenerate brownfield areas that it was agreed at the WICA meeting that would come to us is particularly is important work and work that we would all support. So I do think again there are some decisions around how the government has decided to fund regeneration and transport and infrastructure investment. That means that, like I say, that means that we do receive a significant amount of money through WICA. When we going back to when we signed up to devolution, one of the main reasons we signed up to it was to get more resources into sort of the vital things that we need. And the only route the government made available to us at that time was devolution. So I do think there's some important work to do around making sure we're maximising the benefits of devolution, and also making sure that WICA are working with us to on our key priorities as well as a city, to make sure we're able to move forward on those as well. So if there's nobody else wants to come in on this paper, I'll turn to the recommendations on page 179 and see everybody's happy with those recommendations. So if we move on to item 12, please.
Thank you, Leader. And the next of my papers is also one of the financial reports, and that's on the current financial reporting of month 4. And I just want to say at the outset of my introductions today that I want to thank the Victoria and the financial team for the work that they've done in bringing together the information and all the information about the work that's being done to try and mitigate the financial position that the council are in. It also gives me no pleasure in reporting to Executive Board that at month 4 we are projected of an overspend of £33.9 million. At the last Executive Board meeting, we did say that it was likely to get worse before it got better for us, and indeed that has happened. The report gives some more detail for Executive Board members about the work that's been undertaken to try and mitigate those pressures, such as absorbing the in-year pressures and staying within budget, a recruitment freeze, an essential spend freeze, as well as a non-essential spend freeze, sorry, I should say, as well as other avenues that we're already taking. The position is extremely challenging for all the directorates, but the main overspend for us appears to be in children's and families, where we've heard previously about a national issue of councils not being funded enough to deliver the statutory services that they need to protect children. I wish I could report something different to Executive Board, but unfortunately I can't. But we're doing everything we can to bring that spend back into balance for the end of the year. Thanks, Leader.
Thank you. Are there any comments, please? Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I don't think anyone has pleasure in giving or receiving this report. I think it was Councillor Carter that made the comment in full council last week that there have to be serious questions asked when we set a budget in February and we're so far away from it in month 4. That is, I don't resile in any way from the financial challenge that we have, but in terms of a budget setting process, there has to be questions about whether we set the budget correctly in the first place when we're so far away so quickly. Thankfully, I don't look at this and feel like we're the next Birmingham, but we are the second largest council in the country. I don't think it'd be a huge surprise to anyone in this around this table if, following the situation in Birmingham, we end up being the biggest council in the country before too long, and all eyes are on us. I'd say I'm astonished at the 4 new measures that are introduced, not that they're there, but that they're new, that stay within budget, absorb in-year pressures, highlight issues early, and robust monitoring is essential. Why isn't that just what we do? Why is that a new measure in response to this situation? So, yeah, I think we understand where the challenges are. Children's services, we have to look at how we budget there. We know it's demand pressures. You can't not spend the money when children and families need support. They need support, and money should never be an object. And I absolutely get we need to join the lobby for government to do more on that. But we can't hide behind that and say, actually, we shouldn't be in this position in month 4, having set a budget in February. Yeah, there are a lot of questions to answer. I think there's a job for all of us to do, but mine is to ask those questions. How do we find ourselves in this position so quickly? The plan is there. Yeah, we've got to do better.
Thank you. Victoria, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would say that the budget is set through the autumn, so we do a lot of work with the refreshed medium-term financial strategy through the summer, as we've done this year, and we present the position here as part of that medium-term financial strategy in September. Then up until through the autumn months, we're refining that position ready for the provisional budget that goes to Executive Board in December. So, and then it starts the consultation process. So really, rather than it being from a February budget until the end of the year, it is actually started to be set in from May the year before, to be able to get all those projections into the position that we can start reporting on. Children's and families is a national issue. It's not something that's specific for Leeds. There's been a significant increase in the number of children coming into looked after for the authority, but where we've placed those is within the city where it's possible, with those measures of keeping the children at home or in foster carers, etc. But we have seen the cost of external residential for those children where we've not seen as a significant increase in the number, but the cost of providing that care has significantly increased for those who are already placed there, but for new children coming in. And you can see over the last couple of years how that has doubled, and nobody could have foreseen that. And I think even when we did set the budget, it was robust at that point. But we started to see the trajectory of the increase in the overspend for children's of the latter year of last year, and that was reported. And because of that position, we took a stance that we would start the detailed monitoring as soon as the end of the financial year and the beginning of the new one. And that's why you started to see that position so early in August. So I would say that the setting of the budget and the monitoring was robust through that period. What we have done going forward is recognise that that trend is continuing, and that the cost of that provision is there, and that we've built that into the budget, and that's why we are seeing a budget gap of the scale that we've got for next year to reflect those demand and demography pressures that we're seeing both in adults and children's, and those inflationary pressures. Just on the other point around the key messages, there were key messages, not key measures, and the messages were for all staff within the authority around what we needed to continue to do. The key measures that have been in place now through the summer was around the recruitment freeze and the non-essential spend. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Tom, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's a good discussion to be having, and a good challenge that we should be making. I won't repeat what Victoria said, because I completely agree with what she said, and we would never, be any other position where we wouldn't have a robust process and be happy, with the budget that we set. However, there are a number of things in the process that make it very difficult for us to deal with these. Deal with a stable and medium-term planned budgetary process. One is that the pay rises that went through the system were delayed significantly, and so we and weren't fully funded in the settlement. So that rebounded straight into our baseline, which has caused underlying pressures, which we're still feeling now. Another one was the repeated case that was made cross-party about the pressures in children's services that have been made for over 2 years and has not been addressed and needs to be addressed. The fact that councils get the settlement usually a week before Christmas Eve, which makes it incredibly difficult for us to consult properly and to do things in the way that we want to in the city. The fact that new burdens is really a discredited process now. If you take POPs, the waste provision that we have to now make mid-year, we've got a pressure of about, I think it's 1 million or 2 million in the budget. So I think there are a number of things that we need to work with the government, work with Whitehall to try and make it easier for local government to plan properly in a situation to where we're having underlying pressures on demand. And I would make a final point that the way Whitehall's money is organised is that they have 2 separate funding streams for their departments. One is called AMI, which is annual managed expenditure, and the other one is called DEL, which is departmental expenditure limits. Most departments are run through the DEL bit, and we're run through the DEL bit, which is a planned process where you get your money and you've got to hit that budget. Annual managed expenditure is there to deal with demand pressures. So the welfare state, for example, is funded through that, because at the start of the year, you don't know how much an employment benefit you're going to have to charge. Councils don't get that advantage. Whitehall gets that advantage. And so every council that's got a pressure this year is a result of that split. We should get, as a sector, I believe, more recognition that we have to deal with demand pressures just as much as national agencies have to.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any more? Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, it was just to come back. The one thing I wanted to add was, I think we're very lucky in Leeds to have some excellent finance officers, and I'd add my thanks to them for the work that they do. But we can't get complacent. I take fully on board the points Tom has made, and I'm committed to working with the leader and Tom to try and make those representations to government. I think we do have to make sure, though, that we don't just focus on that. There are more things we can do. For every year, one of the 17 years I've been in this council, I think we've had this discussion about children's services, and the directorate overspending. I won't embarrass anyone around the table, but there are more than one officer in multiple departments who predict when the budget is set that they will be asked to make additional savings in year to help children's services, and they kind of squirrel it away in advance, so they already know where they're going to look when the time comes. And I agree with Tom, actually. I think it is a demand-led service, and there has to be flexibility built into it. There has to be flexibility built into our budgeting process. We only ever seem to underestimate the demand. I can't ever remember a time that we overestimated it. And so we've got to take our share of responsibility and do those things locally, as well as do the lobbying for the changes that are needed nationally.
Thank you. Councillor Venner, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasise the point that the issue with children's services, and it is a national issue, as has already been said, is the obscene cost of external placements. So although our number of looked after children is rising, as it is nationally, the cost is rising disproportionately to that. At the moment, there's a lot of, we're experiencing adolescents coming into care, and again, that's a national picture. There's a picture of long-term foster placements breaking down, adoptive placements breaking down, SGO placements, and that reflects the pressure Julie referred to earlier that families are under in terms of the pandemic, the cost of living crisis. And of course, when you're talking about children that are looked after or have been previously, that's children with a history of trauma who've been disproportionately impacted by the last few years as a result. So there's a lot we're doing that we've talked about at previous meetings around developing our own children's homes so we can keep children in Leeds, recruiting more foster carers. Our number of foster carer beds has actually stayed really stable. But we've got this increase in external residential because of more children coming into care with more complex needs. But the cost of those placements is just, they've gone up ridiculous percentages, and that's the case nationally. If we were the only council in this position, I think the criticism would be fair, but actually this is the area where every council's overspent pretty much, regardless of whether they're urban or rural, which party's in administration. We're all really, really losing a lot of money, primarily on external residential placements, and there needs to be some national leadership around the obscenity of profiteering in relation to children that are survivors of trauma. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Julie, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'd just like to add really that when you compare Leeds, when you look at Leeds, and the scale of Leeds, the size of Leeds, the challenges that we have in Leeds, which we've previously talked about in terms of impact of the pandemic, in terms of cost of living crisis, in terms of the issues that are facing children and families, mental health, substance misuse, domestic violence. Actually, we compare very, very well with our comparators. So whilst every local authority is seeing an increase in the numbers of children looked after, actually we are not seeing an increase to that extent. And what that still reflects really is the quality, the practice and the dedication, the commitment that we have got, through our own workforce, but also as a partnership. So whilst we have had those increases, we continue to compare very, very well with other core cities and other comparisons. I would just like to say, as we have, discussed here previously, that we've got a very, very rigorous, cross-corporate approach to this. We have our delivery board, we have our transformation service. I have a meeting this afternoon. I've got a meeting tomorrow morning. The focus, the priority, the grip, the constant monitoring on this area, is absolutely second to none, and that will continue.
Thank you, Julie. Are there any more comments on this paper? Councillor Cooper, please.
Thank you, and can I thank everybody for their contribution to this conversation around the report this afternoon. I just want to make a couple of points really, and Councillor Lamb, you picked out a few things, and one in particular was that you were surprised that we weren't already doing these things. We are already doing those things and have been doing for a long time. It's about reiterating those messages to everybody within the organisation to ensure that we're repeating those messages yet again. And that work is, as Victoria has said, as Mariana has said in an earlier report, and as Julie has mentioned as well, cross-council work is going on to try and bring down the pressures within the budget that we are facing. And we are also building those pressures into next year's budget, and the medium-term financial plan, which was the earlier item that I reported on, has already got those pressures built in around looked after children, and also in terms of the pay rise going forward in the next 5 years as well. So hopefully they won't become so quickly overspent in future years, and that pressure is already there. But I have to say, I've got to take you to task about saying that directors have some amounts squirreled away, because after 13 years of austerity, year on year on year, on cuts to public funding, to suggest that we have got anything left in a drawer, in a cupboard, in somebody's squirrel fund away is in fact quite, I find that offensive. And how much money Leeds City Council has had withdrawn from its budget since 2010. And if you don't, I'll reiterate, it's £2.5 billion over that amount of time. You may dispute the figures. I can actually tell you they are true, and they are going up. And next year they will go up even more. So as for the perhaps comment on are we going to get a snap election? Yes, please.
Thank you. I'll see we're coming together. Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, well, I need to come back on that. So the 2.5 billion, it's a nice, neat, cumulative political figure. I won't put the finance officers in a comfortable position of having to be asked if they recognise that number, but just say it's a cumulative number. That is not the amount that's cut from the city's budget. So I take some of the points which are fair. That's a political convenient bit of ingenious mathematics. We could do lots of cumulative things like that of money that's been spent and get to similar big numbers, but it's not really helpful. The rest of the points valid, that one not so much.
Thank you. It's adding up. So the clever mathematics, it's adding up every year.
Yeah.
The amount of money that's been taken away from this council since austerity was imposed in 2010. I don't think simple addition is clever clever mathematics. I'm too old to have benefited from the Tony Blair numeracy hours at school, though I know some of my younger cabinet colleagues probably did, but I think it is simple addition, and I don't think it's clever mathematics at all. But as you say, Councillor Lamb, we'll agree to disagree on this point, and I shall turn to recommendations on page 290 and see if the board agree with those, which they do. That's great. Thank you, Councillor Cooper. And we're on to Councillor Price papers, please, and item 13.
Thank you, Leader. So item 13 is the Leeds Inclusive Growth Strategy. Appendix 2 has been circulated as supplementary information on this as well. So initially, The plan from 2018 to 2023 was agreed in the July 18 Executive Board, and this plan takes us through to 2030. Page 3 of the report covers some of the achievements to date, which includes working with our anchor institutions to create jobs, keeping procurement spend within Leeds and West Yorkshire. A lot of this was covered in one of our white papers in full council only last week. The report also highlights the additional investment from the Arts Council to Leeds, which is an additional £8 million this year in our year of culture, and also details some of the work we're doing to bring forward with business anchors to spread that good practice across the city. The report also goes into our future use of the social progress index, which will be a really helpful way of us being able to monitor the impact of this policy and impact by ward as well, so we can really kind of get down in that detail. I know Councillor Galton is no longer with us, but he always used to ask how we could prove the results of things, so hopefully he's watching somewhere, and we're very happy to see that. I will leave it there for introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. Are there any comments, please? Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, there's very little you can disagree with here. I think the challenge I would have is the same as the previous strategy. And the one thing that I wish I was making this up, but at a scrutiny board meeting earlier this year, an officer told us that there was now so many strategies in Leeds that we have to have a strategy to deal with all the strategies. And this is another one where it sounds great, but what is the measure of success? That's the one. There's lots of things to measure, lots of KPIs, lots of indicators, but in 2030, how we look back and determine this has been a success.
So I think already we're 5 years into using this inclusive growth measure. As I said, page 3 covers what's already been achieved, which includes, I think it was just shy of 1 billion spend that had been kept in West Yorkshire rather than being sent out. Delighted to hear you say you would agree with everything in the paper. The economics of this are quite different to some of the other economics of austerity sent to us from the government. And I'd reiterate the fact the only thing that's really holding Leeds back in terms of what progress we can make in terms of economics is the £2.5 billion that's been cut from Leeds City Council over the past 13 years. I will see if Eve wants to add anything to that.
Thank you.
Eve, please.
Thank you, Leader. My name's Eve Roothouse. I'm Chief Officer for Culture and Economy. There's 3 key things I'd highlight. So first of all, we've committed to do an annual progress report so that we can demonstrate how we're progressing against each of the big ideas that are set out. Secondly, we report and pay attention through scrutiny in particular on traditional economic measures like GDP and employment figures, but also increasingly discuss the social progress index, which we're embedding into some of our discussions in the council. So we will also be looking at those measures on an ongoing basis as we do with scrutiny over time, and report to scrutiny on different areas of the strategy in terms of delivery.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I didn't say I agree with everything. I said there's not much you can disagree with. It's very different. Can someone tell me in a sentence what success will look like in 2030?
Councillor Pryor, please.
As the economy in Leeds grows, we carry all of our citizens with it. It's not just about those at the top getting richer, it's about the whole city seeing the benefit of that growth.
Tom, please. You can have more than a sentence, Tom.
Yeah, and I was with a global tech company this week and talking about productivity issues in the private sector and the public sector. And we were agreeing that the private sector is a simpler, clearer, and more predictable method of understanding success. The answer is pretty simple. Although you could have a debate of even that in the private sector about which is the one you use. Is it profit? Is it shareholder value? Is it some of the environmental sustainability goals that some businesses hold dear? So even that isn't that simple. When you apply that to the absolutely, accurate description from Councillor Pryor, there isn't a single silver bullet indicator for that, for what everybody is agreed we want to happen in this strategy in the city, because GVA is flawed. There was a time when I started out on economic development where it would be jobs. We'd stand there and we'd say, actually, it's all about jobs. It isn't anymore, because we've got jobs, but people are doing 3 jobs at once and they haven't got, the security of that. So I think you do end up with a more balanced scorecard behind it. I think that's why the social progress index is important. And I think that's where we will come to the wider, a bit more complex, but still clearer answer to your question about successes, has been said by people before about the city ambition and this one.
And I think in economic terms, a lot of these things are linked. When you look at things like the health of a population compared to the economy, while they're quite separate things that you would measure, if you're looking to get the best out of a workforce, actually having a healthy workforce significantly improves that, which is building on from what Tom says, just sheer looking at kind of the top line figures doesn't give you a full picture. It doesn't give you, a full sense of what you want to achieve in economy. And I think that's why the social progress index is really useful, because it can show all those measures and how they all feed into each other. To have a healthy economy, you need a healthy workforce. You need a happy workforce, and all of this feeds in together to create that inclusive growth that we want to achieve. I know this is called a lot of different things by different people. There's a lot in here that I think in other areas of the country people would refer to as community wealth building. It's all a very similar economic model that hopefully will just lead to a stronger Leeds economy.
Thank you. I shall turn to the recommendations on page 341, and I take it that the board is happy with those recommendations. So we'll move on to item 14, please.
Thank you, Leader. So this is the Learning Places Programme and School Condition Update Report. So this updates Executive Board on the current position on school place planning in the future. Between 2009 and 2018, we created 14,000 new primary school places. Obviously, those children are ageing through the system, so we've had to create the new secondary places and at the moment FE places. However, we also know there's a decline in the birth rate at the bottom end, and there has been for a few years, and that decline isn't uniform across the city as well. There are some areas where populations are remaining high and even increasing slightly, and other areas where it's dropping much faster. So we're currently working with schools to reduce their admission numbers where possible. Obviously, the increase in demand on SEN places continues, and we're working hard to provide those places too. And that's a real mix across the board. We've seen a huge increase in demand for SEN places since COVID, and some of those are around short-term issues that hopefully children will be able to see the other side of, whether that means perhaps their language hasn't developed as much as it could throughout those COVID years. Some of that SEN need is going to be more longer term for those children. It is a real mix of that. The report obviously talks about school condition funding, something which we talked about at length at council last week as well, and obviously it's been in the news recently. It's got a full list of the schools in the PSPB, the Priority Schools Building Programme, which includes Wetherby High in Councillor Lamb's own ward, and also details the school repair backlog, which we have conservatively estimated, conservative with a small c, at around £66 million. For this, we're given around £6 million a year, so that's less than 10% of the need. I know obviously the issues around RAC are very high on people's agenda, and I provided council with an update on that, which hasn't really progressed since last week. But I'm clear that I think the debate around school condition funding needs to be much wider than that. RAC and concrete is only one issue, one of many issues that school buildings are facing. Following council voting for the white paper last week to call on the government to properly fund this, I will be writing to the Department for Education for a 9th time to ask that they properly fund school repairs. And I look forward to Gillian Keegan's response as the busiest person in the UK, I believe. I will leave it there.
Thank you. Are there any comments, please? Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, hopefully the response is clean and with no expletives. Well, I couldn't let the opportunity pass not to welcome the investment into Wetherby High School, which, as long-standing members of this board will know, is something I've been pushing for some time. I'd also like to put on record my thanks to Councillor Pryor, a large number of officers, Jane Warren in particular, Martin Farrington, Neil Evans when he was still there, and Tom, even the former leader Baroness Blake, for actually being willing to work flexibly and openly. And we did have a solution ready to go if the government didn't fund it. And it shows what we can do when we're creative, flexible, and willing to work together. And that offer's always on the table from me, and not just where it's in my own ward, but anywhere in the city to try and deliver good outcomes. And it's only fair to say my job generally is to come here and criticise, but it's nice from time to time to be able to say, no, thank you, and good work done. I think on the RAC issue, I think we have to be a bit careful. I think there's certainly no intention of repeating the debate last week, which I think was unfortunate and unhelpful, actually, because I think this is a wider issue than even for schools. I think the council is probably waiting with bated breath for the sort of things that are going to come that are in our direct responsibility. And actually, I think rather than turning it into a political football, we all need to take a breath and accept that what happened here was governments and councils of all colours over many years prioritised trying to build things very quickly and cheaply that weren't built to last. Because when we're having to rebuild a school like Wetherby that was built in the 60s, where Victorian buildings are standing perfectly well, and there are many examples of buildings like that where the race to deliver stuff fast has resulted in poor quality housing, schools, other buildings. It's going to be the same in the private sector, and the chickens are really going to come home to roost when the PFI schools that were built under the last Labour government come back into public ownership. And again, prefabricated buildings done very cheaply, not built to last, and we're going to have to pick up the responsibility for that for too long. So I think we probably need to take a step back, take a breath, and really think about how we're going to deal with those condition issues going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. Councillor Cooper, please.
Yeah, if I can just pick up your point about the wider potential for RAC in other buildings, and just for some reassurance to Executive Board that we have got no identified RAC in our buildings. Currently, there is a audit being undertaken with buildings that might fall into the time span from when they were built, and that detailed work is going on to survey them and find out if there is any RAC in those buildings, but so far we haven't got any identified.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb.
So I know we're off-piste, but it would be useful to get something back, actually, because it's not just RAC. It's the whole principle that was taken in multiple forums of cheap buildings with cheap types of concrete, that water's got in, caused all kinds of problems. If we just focus purely on RAC, I think there are other types of building, types of concrete use. It's that principle of cheap buildings to try and deliver fast outcomes. That is really what's going to be at the root of this. And I think this is, sadly, I fear we've barely scratched the surface of the issue.
Are there any more comments on this report, please? Councillor Pryor, please.
Just to sum up, really, I appreciate Councillor Lamb's comments that obviously this has been going on some time. A lot of these buildings have been built decades ago, but I would have to push back on some things. I would love to just get on and repair a lot of these buildings, but the fact remains that it's reported that the Prime Minister was told 2.5 years ago that there was a risk to life unless he did this, and he chose not to. I think all of us deal with situations as they arrive on our desk, and it's clear that the then Chancellor Rishi Sunak chose not to. We are funded less than 10% of what we need to fully repair our school estate. And that's something that we've been talking to the government for over 5 years now. So yes, I would love to just crack on and deal with some of these issues, but right now we don't have the tools to do it. And a lot of the work that's detailed in this report is us choosing what are the most urgent things that need addressing and the work we're doing. And I shall leave it there for this report.
Councillor Lamb.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought we weren't going to go there, but we have. Just to be clear, the first report of RAC issues was put on Tony Blair's desk in 1997 from a report commissioned by John Major's government in 1994. I don't think any government for decades is immune from this. So if we're going to play that game, then let's make sure everybody is taking their share of responsibility. And as I made the point last week, the reason schools don't have enough money is because of the extensive cost of PFI that Gordon Brown saddled them with.
John Major's PFI, if we're doing history lessons, John Major's PFI. But anyway, as you know, we're dealing with the government of the day that we've had for 13 years, and we'll move on that basis. So I'll turn to the recommendations on page 359, and I take it the board are happy with those recommendations. That if you could move on to item 15, please.
Thank you, Leader. So the final item 15, is the provision of a loan for Leeds Culture Trust to cover culture sector tax relief claims. So the Leeds Culture Trust has requested a loan so they can invest all of their funding into the year of culture. There are 101 days left of 2023, and at the moment the Culture Trust has outstanding applications for cultural sector tax relief, theatre tax relief, and museums and galleries exhibition tax relief. This loan would allow them to spend the money in year rather than concluding the year and having money left over. And obviously, given the financial challenge of the council, which we've heard today, we're reassured that that loan will be repaid. The Culture Trust have sought their own legal and financial advice on this, and we as a council sought our own as well. I shall leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. Can I get some clarity before I make my comments on what it is okay to discuss in public? I think this is a conversation that should be had in public, but I know some of it is on pink papers, and I want to make sure I don't inadvertently stray into an area that I shouldn't.
Well, the easiest advice, if it's in the public papers, it can be discussed in public, and if it's in the pink papers, it's in the confidential section. I hope that's helpful.
So are we happy that the amount is, because we didn't mention the amount in public session, are we happy that that's said in the public domain? Yep. Okay. So in an earlier executive board this year, I was admonished for suggesting that we were heading for this to be a damp squib of a year of culture. I think perhaps I overstated it. It's been a disappointment with some notable exceptions, particularly in the ward-based work. But I am absolutely wholly opposed to putting the council's money at risk. Nearly £1.9 million of council taxpayers' money. I appreciate that there has been advice given, which I won't refer to, but I've sat in recent meetings and been assured of similar advice that turned out to be wrong. And just to be crystal clear, if this money wasn't forthcoming from HMRC, the council is on the hook and the taxpayers of Leeds are on the hook. And when we're talking about non-essential spend, this is non-essential spend. Why have they not gone to the mayor and to Wyker to ask for help? Why have they come to the city council? I think I note even without this money, they're already having to scale back programmes, cut things back. All of the warnings that we gave for years to use your cumulative approach, we've spent about £50 million of council taxpayers' money delivering this year of culture, just to take your mathematic approach to it. And I don't think the people of Leeds would feel this has delivered good value for money. I'm absolutely opposed and would want it noted that I cannot support putting £1.9 million of council taxpayers' money at risk for this.
First of all, there is absolutely no cumulative approach you could have reached that figure with. Absolutely none. That figure is completely bogus that you're quoting that we've spent on 2020. No, you're not, Alan. Actually, you're cumulative. I'll get the crayons out later if you want to explain that, because there is no way you have reached that figure. The figure is actually about 10% of what you quoted from core council funding. Now, 2023 as a year has faced the same financial challenges that a lot of other places have, around inflation, around difficulty raising money. And actually what this loan allows them to do is spend the money in year over the next 101 days, rather than ending the year in 101 days and then having money left over. So it keeps the money in the year. We've had advice from obviously 2023's own financial advice and our own as well, which we sought, and we found someone who had experience with these sort of cultural sector tax relief. So I'm confident in that advice.
Councillor Lamb, and it's also worth reflecting, of course, 2023 approached ECMS, who didn't provide any money, although I believe they provided money for Bradford. But Councillor Lamb, please.
Yeah, it's a very specific question, to be really clear. If this money, this tax rebate wasn't forthcoming and the advice was wrong, if I've read the papers correctly, the council is liable in full for that.
Martin, please.
Yeah, Councillor Lamb's right. That is the risk that was set out in the public part of the report, that it's a low risk, but it's a residual risk balanced against the risk of not providing the loan and the consequences, as Councillor Pryor set out. So it's the members' view that they take on that balance of risk.
But there isn't no risk. There is a risk that the council has to fund in full this £1.9 million.
Yeah, there's no risk either way, Councillor Lamb. There's the risk of not providing the loan provides a certain risk in terms of the impact of the programme for Leeds 2023. Providing the loan, as set out in the report, provides a low risk to the council in terms of the position with the HMRC claims.
Okay. Are there any more comments on the public part of the meeting on this? So, well, we'll move to the recommendation before going to the private. And I think you're saying you're reserving your position on this, Councillor Lamb. Yes, we've noted your comments. Yes, yeah. Okay, we've noted your comments. Great. We'll move into the private session then.